Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club, featuring a talk on electric vehicles that's going to be given by Greg Kilmer. This meeting is free and open to the public, and we are doing it via Zoom, as you just heard a few moments ago, and a recording of this will be made available later through our Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club website, and it will be available posted on YouTube as a video. You don't have to be a member to attend these meetings, although we do encourage membership in Sierra Club as it helps our efforts to protect the environment and to provide education and outing opportunities to local residents, as well as to help move legislation locally, statewide, as well as nationally. So these are important efforts, important times, and being a member helps further those efforts. I welcome the audience and Greg Kilmer to tonight's general membership meeting of the Susquehanna Group of the Sierra Club, which will feature a talk by Greg on electric vehicles in general and how Broome County Transit and how New York Public Transportation have been working on a transition from fossil fuel powered buses to hybrid electric buses, and now to fully electric battery powered buses. BC Transit serves the Binghamton area and collaborates with a company known as BAE Systems, which is based in Endicott. This company is the designer and manufacturer of the drive systems that go into these hybrid electric and also the battery powered buses that Broome County has been using. And I have a little printout here. The top one with the two humps on the roof, those are the hybrid buses that you've seen around Broome County. There's at least 14 of those that I'm aware of. And then this bottom one is the new style made by Nova Bus, which is their manufacturing plant is in Plattsburgh, New York. These are fully battery powered buses. And they will also feature a drive system and battery management system designed and built by BAE Systems here in Endicott, New York. So this is good news for New York State, good news for the local economy as well, and good news for our local emissions. Riders will have quieter buses. They will have a nice experience. They run smooth. They accelerate very, very well, and they don't smell. So that's a nice thing. So a little bit about Greg. Greg Kilmer is the Broome County Commissioner of Public Transportation. As a volunteer, he is also an executive board member of the New York Public Transit Association and serves as its treasurer and secretary, and is a member of the legislative committee. He was formerly assistant director of transportation services at Cornell University, and his education was at Binghamton University School of Management, and then postgraduate studies he did at Cornell University. He has 23 years of experience with alternative vehicle programs, including electric vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, compressed natural gas, biodiesel, and hydrogen electric. So we're lucky to have Greg as our Commissioner of Public Transportation, and we're lucky to have him tonight here at our meeting. So welcome, Greg, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, well, once again, technology is the bane of our existence, but what would we do without it? So, actually, I've spent an awful lot of my career implementing technology, so I'm well familiar with the challenges. So Valdi, thanks for having me, and I appreciate speaking with the group tonight. Valdi did a pretty good job talking about my background, and so I want to talk to you today about a little bit of what I've done around alternative fuel vehicles, and talk to you about what we're doing in Broome County, as well as what I'm doing as part of the professional association as an executive board member with NIPTA. Then I want to talk about some of the obstacles and some of the challenges we have in getting to a battery electric fleet. So anyhow, I was at Cornell University for 15 years and probably the unique thing about my background is that I spent 23 years actually applying alternative fuel technology in a real world environment, where I had to run businesses and services and implement technology that at times had been unproven. In addition, most of the time we were studying as well. So working at a research university, I'm pretty familiar with, running an operation and actually doing the scholarly and analytical look at implementing alternative fuels. So while at Cornell, I did have an electric vehicle program as well as a compressed natural gas program, which worked quite well there for many years. Did some prototyping and worked with General Motors on hydrogen battery electric vehicles and looked at some of the challenges there, worked with Johnson Graduate School to help them do the financial analysis of implementing the technology. And that's one thing that's always important to look at is one of the things that people like myself are always responsible for is the bottom line. We have to be responsible to a budget. We're using taxpayer dollars, regardless of what form they typically arrive to us. So, we have to be analytical about the cost of implementing this technology. And it's one of the things that's exciting about electric vehicles is it certainly does have the promise of being a more financially efficient way, as well as environmentally and socially preferable. So anyhow, at Cornell, I also worked with biodiesel project. Most large delivery vehicles use diesel. And so most people are pretty familiar with biodiesel. It certainly had its challenges and probably not as easily adaptable as a mainstream technology. But I've been with Broome County Transit as Commissioner of Public Transportation for 8 years, and I'm responsible for all public transportation in Broome County. In addition, I work with our local planning agency to work on overall big picture funding for roads, highways, bridges, greenways, things of that nature, including transit. So my role with NIPTA, it's a voluntary role, much like I believe everybody on this organization and board. But we represent public transportation in New York State. New York State, with the MTA, is the largest public transportation system in North America. The rest of New York State makes up the 7th largest public transportation entity. So between us, we do more than 36% of all public transportation rides in New York State. Not only is it an incredibly efficient way, but it's a way of dealing with congestion. And public transportation, by its very design, because of the density of people that we move, is one of the most energy efficient ways to transport people. But that doesn't mean that the industry hasn't tried to find different forms of propulsion. So if you look at the 120, 30 years of mass transit in Broome County, we've had everything from ox cart, and we had electrified trolleys, which is kind of interesting how we're coming full circle with electrification. But we were one of the first transit systems to do what they call rubber wheel, which was to implement buses, which provide a lot more flexibility than having a fixed rail line. And that happened in the late 1930s, and those ran on gasoline. So eventually we moved to diesel buses, and diesel energy has been the choice for many years because if you look at the potential energy of any source and how much energy you could store on a vehicle, diesel happens to be very, very good in that sense. What it's not very good at is combusting completely, and as a result, it tends to be very difficult to offer clean emissions out of a diesel vehicle. So, and for many years, Broome County actually worked with a compressed natural gas program. Unfortunately, that program died with a flood and a very expensive refueling station that nobody had funds to replace. So in recent years, we've been doing hybrid electric vehicles, and we're now on our 3rd generation design of hybrid electric buses. And we've done that in conjunction with BAE Systems in Endicott. So one of the interesting things about BAE is they took a spin-off of military technology and systems integration experience and offered up to public sector use. And they've got a lot of success in transit buses, as well as garbage pickup and refuse vehicles, and even trolleys, which do a lot of ferrying between New York State and New Jersey, as well as into Massachusetts. So with NIPTA, we are organized. We represent about 100 different transit systems, and the largest of which are what we call operating authorities. So that's Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, the MTA. And so they are very large and typically very well-funded organizations who have already been implementing electric vehicles. Broome County, where I'm Commissioner of Transportation, we've recently won an award. We applied for a Lono grant, federal Lono grant, and we did it with the unique approach that this was a New York State-oriented solution in that BAE is providing the propulsion systems. Novabus, this company actually owned by Volvo. They are a Canadian company, but they're a large international company. They made a huge investment in New York State and put a manufacturing plant in the North Country. In addition, with we have a arrangement that we've structured called a living laboratory arrangement, where we've been providing open data source sharing on all the technology. We literally keep terabytes of data on our battery hybrid electric buses, and BAE uses that for development. As you know, living in upstate New York, we've got some of the toughest weather, extremes, and it's a perfect test bed of real world use, and particularly between the hills and the rapid temperature changes. It's a great way to help develop the vehicles. Well, with this new electric bus grant that we're getting, where we'll be getting 6 brand new BAE Nova full electric vehicles, we are opening up our living laboratory agreement. So we'll be able to share that data with Binghamton University, and particularly with their expertise and growing educational programs related to electric energy, electric vehicles, battery storage technologies. So we also got Novabus and BAE to share what would normally be considered intellectual property and something that would be closely guarded by the corporate lawyers. So this is really an exciting opportunity to move towards an electrification of battery buses for New York State and the country, but also a chance to learn from it. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. So, but I do want to say that at any point, I want to make this an interactive experience. I'm going to open up time at the end of my talk to do questions and answers. I'm sure that you folks are probably much better versed in the language than average. So feel free to try to pick my brain and challenge me. So one of the things that makes sense about us moving to taking public transportation towards electrification, both here in Broome County and statewide, nationwide, is that it lends itself very well to electrification in the sense that these are vehicles that run for long hours and operate for many, many miles, yet they return to a base every day where they can be recharged. One of the challenges about the current state of technology with electric buses is trying to replicate the amount of duty cycle and the service that each bus puts out every day. And right now, the technology really isn't there. I can fill up a conventional diesel bus and run it for 2 days without refueling. I could put it out for a 14 to 18-hour service day and change 3 drivers and not have to bring the bus back in for a top off of energy. We can't do that right now with electric buses. So it's one of the challenges that we're facing as the technology gets more advanced is about energy storage. And for the time being, lithium-ion batteries are really the state of the art. There are other battery alternatives being developed that are being tested, but right now lithium-ion batteries is really the standard. So with that, we have to put as much energy storage in terms of kilowatts that we can put onto that vehicle. Now realize that buses used to be driven by a combination of air systems, diesel engines, electric systems that all operated off a diesel engine. So to convert a bus to work on full electric, you have to convert things like power steering and air conditioning and heating and these type of things that normally you would heat a bus off the excess heat coming off of your engine. In this case, there really isn't a lot of heat that can go towards heating the cabin. So, in a climate like upstate New York, we need to plan to have enough energy available to keep our buses hot and warm and comfortable during the tough winter months. So with that, we had a choice between recharging our vehicles in the field, sometimes known as opportunity charging, or recharging them back at the transit center. It happens to be in Vestal on Old Mill Road. So it's typically better to charge these electric vehicles slower. When you charge them really quickly, it takes away from some of the life of the battery and the components on there. So, but that said, we actually, to replicate the amount of service with the clean diesel, we have to have more buses, and we have to convert our facilities to accommodate charging. So with this 6 vehicles that we've got coming, and it'll be probably late, we should have announcement of production, but we're anticipating having them on the road in 23. But we have to do some measures to get our facility ready for electrification. So we're adding 8 charging stations in anticipation that we'll probably get 2 more buses coming that'll be full electric. But in order to give us enough electrical energy, and I heard Valdi talking a little bit about the grid and preparation for an electrified economy, we're having to have a separate line run by NYSEG to our own pole, which will drop that energy down to a transformer and feed that into our separate charging stations. So the big discussion we're having at the statewide level with the DOT and the DEC and others is about meeting the goals of electrification, particularly as set forth in New York State. Are they practical, and do we really have a grid that is capable of providing the amount of energy that we need? So I like to think of electricity like water when I'm talking about how it works, but we have to make sure we have enough water pressure coming to our campus to push all this energy into our buses and do it in a timely manner. So we need a big enough pipe, and we need enough pressure behind that pipe. And that's where, as you look at electrifying all different forms of transportation and even getting into homes and businesses and other structures, is the ability to generate that electricity robust enough? And then secondly, do you have enough local infrastructure to anticipate the growth? So in our case, we're actually doing some engineering studies and working with consultants to plan on a full electrified future for Broome County Transit. And very likely we will wind up needing a substation or actually a microgrid of our own to provide up to 60 vehicles with the kind of electrical energy that we're going to need. And all of this takes time and money. And one of the challenges is, even with all the time and money, is getting people to understand the technology. So our vehicles, they get a lot of wear and tear, as everybody knows that drives in this climate, and they need a lot of work. And so traditionally, our mechanics are oriented towards working on conventional vehicles and diesel vehicles, internal combustion engines, and that's changing very rapidly. This is a whole different type of discipline, and one that requires a lot of specialized training. And quite frankly, it's one of the challenges we're trying to figure out how to solve, is to entice enough people into that type of maintenance trades. So, of course, then the other challenge is obviously that of financial. So I can buy a conventional clean diesel 40-foot transit bus for about $550,000. A hybrid bus, right around $750,000, about $750,000. And by the way, our 3rd generation hybrids are actually running as electric vehicles 1/3 of every hour that they operate. They're in full electric mode, where the engine's actually shut off. And that was one of the projects that we helped BAE pioneer and study. We used technology known as geofencing. I'm sure some of you are aware of it, but basically you draw an invisible dotted line around, say, the center of downtown Binghamton or around Binghamton University, and also in our case, down Washington Avenue in Endicott. When our buses sense that they're approaching that area, they shut down the diesel engine and they go to full electric mode. And they don't turn back on until they need to charge again when they're outside of that zone. And we engineers originally projected we do about 20-25% in full electric mode, and we're getting actually 1/3 in full electric mode. So that's one of the things that we're learning is how well this technology goes from theory to actual use and application. And in this case, it was actually better than anticipated. So, but one of the things that we're discussing at the larger macro level is, do you renovate what's on average 40-year-old buildings in the transit industry, or do you build new structures entirely to accommodate electrification and the recharging infrastructure? And right now, the argument is leaning towards rebuilding. So this is something that also adds to the time and the challenge, locating the land and finding the dollars to build this out. Now, realize this is just one industry. So, the realities of moving towards a greener, full electric based economy transportation system is certainly very real, and but one that I've found that the transit industry has embraced. I have not seen a lot of resistance to electrification. What I've seen is a lot of very practical people who are just saying, let's take a measured and knowledgeable approach, and let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we are more than happy to move in that direction, just help ensure that we've got the funding. So with that, that's probably about as much of my formal spiel and presentation. So certainly be open to comment or questions, or so I offer it up back to the floor.
Well, this is Jim. I've got some questions on the training of mechanics. Has there been any contact with SUNY Broome to see if a program could be instituted there?
Not specifically SUNY Broome. The notion of whether it's best to try to utilize the formal educational system or whether we should look to private industry as the training mechanism. My personal feeling, it's going to be a combination of multiple things, including public education as well as private training, and particularly organizations like myself and BAE actually creating our own training programs themselves. I mean, right now the buses we're buying have about 70% of the componentry is standard transit bus componentry, but as time goes on, there's going to be less and less of that. And so it's educational wise, there's always a discussion about, does something like a community college like SUNY Broome, are they, sort of a vocational school? Are they a preparatory approach? So philosophically, I can't say that there's been any concrete decisions about who will be the educational partners.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Kevin Drum seems like a reasonable person to talk to about new programs. He's the president, of course.
Yep. No, I met Kevin.
Yeah. Now, does Broome County Transit have anything like a citizens advisory board?
Other than the public comment sessions and what we do through an organization called BMTS, they're the master planning organization that's dictated by, if you're familiar with them, but they have public comment on our planning and spending.
Okay.
The operating authorities, the larger systems, they do have, by design, they do have public advisory boards as part of their structure.
Okay. Now, as Valdi was talking earlier about the climate action councils, which are tasked with the difficult challenge of trying to make the legislation called the Climate Leadership, Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, to make that come to life and figure out ways to meet the goals set by that piece of legislation. And I've reviewed the transportation section of that, and there's an awful of their scoping plan. And there's an awful lot of talk in it about MOD, mobility optimized development, or mobility optimal development, where communities would, before they make changes in zoning or approve developments, would take mobility into account to, reduce sprawl and so forth.
Yep.
Is there any, is there anything that the BC Transit is doing with local municipalities along those lines?
It's a good question, Jim. So I'm going to speak first about my role with NIPTA. I'm, in addition to secretary and treasurer, I'm also on the legislative committee. And so one of my jobs is to educate, inform, and persuade public policy in New York State. And one of the things that we've been advocating for is the role of public transportation as an economic engine. So, and with that comes hand in hand transit-based development. And so the test has been out there and proven that when you base development with transportation in mind, and particularly when you develop around good, robust public transportation, especially what we call our urban core or line run type of work, that the economic benefit to the community is manifold. I mean, there's 4 to 6 times of every dollar invested in public transportation multiplies back in the local community. The property values that are being served by public transportation are typically higher than any other areas in any community. In addition, the business activity, both bringing employees to work, but also bringing people to your business, is anywhere 12 to 20% higher than it would be without public transportation. So in the multitude of different organizations that I'm affiliated with, I push very hard for transit-based development. And most recently, I've had conversations with the Village of Endicott about, they've gotten stimulus dollars and really trying to make sure that they're embracing transit-based development as they rethink their streetscapes.
Good. Okay. This may be my last one. No, I've got 2 more. I've run across this term of first mile, last mile, but I don't understand it fully. I wondered if you could explain what it is and how BC Transit might address that challenge.
Yeah, it's one of the many vernacular inside baseball terms that we use in the industry, but understand that public transportation, bus public transportation, is most efficient in an urban core environment where we do what's called a line run, meaning the bus goes the same place up and down. In our case, Main Street to Court Street, downtown Binghamton, all the way out to Glendale Park in Western Endicott. And so we're very efficient in moving people that way. But the expectation is that the end user, the rider, will transport themselves up to a mile to get to a fixed route pickup point or to a bus stop. So the big question is, in terms of people who are giving up, single occupancy vehicles, having their own cars, and is how do you make that first mile, last mile more effective? And so, we talk a lot about mobility and multi-mode transportation, and in a very simple term, what we're doing in Broome County that's actually working quite well is bicycles. The ability to ride a bicycle, use our ever expanding greenway network and the rail trails and what's coming online with the downtown to Vestal. But that's an example of first mile, last mile. But there's been a lot of different ways of talking about how to improve first mile, last mile. And one of the things that is very, very strongly emerging as a favorite is what's known as microtransit or transit on demand. So people that are using a transit system can walk, which has its health benefits. They can ride, or possibly they could take small buses that drop them into the system. And this works particularly better when you've got rural type of communities like we have, where you've got very defined urban cores in the river valleys, and then you've got a lot of rural areas. But trying to facilitate that experience, particularly where the climate is pretty rough a good part of the year, how to get those people where they can increase their dependency on public transportation without having to walk a lot of miles and deal with the elements.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My last question. If there were a community group, maybe like the Susquehanna group of the Sierra Club, that was
Sure.
going to advocate with local municipalities on any particular thing that would be helpful to you, what would that be?
Well, I think we've already had some effective collaborations in terms of applying for grants. The Sierra Club has been very supportive, and I think adds a nice weight to our applications. And I realize most competitive grants are just that. There's usually multiples of people asking for funds as opposed to those that actually get it. But from a local perspective, is to really embrace the notion of public transportation as a resource and an asset, particularly when developing or redeveloping. And it can be as simple as just restriping the streets when the DOT comes and fixes up the road surfaces and looks at the roadways. But it can even be things that are more elaborate, like signal priority. And as an example of signal priority, the technology exists where when the bus is coming up to the red light knows it's coming, and it's going to go through its cycle, and it's going to try to allow that transit bus to move more efficiently throughout the community. And what that really does is it keeps the overall traffic volume down, but it allows it incentivizes people to move with public transportation because they could actually get places quicker than if they were in a single occupancy vehicle waiting at traffic lights. So those are the type of measures that be helpful. And one of the other things about signal development is that most vehicles, including buses, emit most of their emissions when they're sitting at idle, particularly when they're cold or after. But sitting at idle, you're in a lot of cases wasting a lot of energy. I know a lot of modern vehicles will turn off, but it's really most efficient to keep that vehicle in motion. They actually consume and produce fewer emissions when they're in an operating temperature as opposed to idle. So anything that helps support the mission of public transportation, and in particular incentivizes people to use public transportation.
Okay. All right. Well, if you think of something at some future time, we might be able to bring a little weight to bear anyway. Thank you very much.
Sure. Appreciate that.
Hey, Greg, this is Scott. As far as your fleet, with 6 EV buses, it sounds like you're not going to have as much of a demand on those initially compared to the other buses. Is that true?
Well, I mean, our intention is to run those vehicles, and in talking to my peers in Albany and Rochester, they're actually having a lot of success with the amount of hours they're getting out of the buses. They're probably not getting some of the efficiency measures they were hoping for. But that said, our intention is to run those vehicles. So when we get those vehicles into fleet, we're going to have more than 60% of our fleet either electric or hybrid electric at that point. And with my experience, I found that the more the technology develops, the higher the uptime and the longer the duty cycle we're getting out of those buses. Does that cover your question?
I think I want to follow up a little bit. It sounded like you had some challenges with the charging stations, but and those will be all installed over time, what you need. And that's an inhibitor. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, yes. I mean, so before our buses will be delivered, we're going to have the infrastructure done. So we'll be ready to plug them in and put them to work right from the beginning. And then we'll be able to accommodate 2 more. As part of this process, this is a multi-year process. We're having consultants do engineering studies to see how much further we can go with our facility in terms of accommodating more electric buses versus the tipping point where it makes sense from an operational perspective and from a financial perspective to actually do some purpose-built building of the structure. Right now, one of the challenges is that we actually need to have a slightly larger fleet to provide the same level of service, and with that, we need to have more physical space. So that will change over time as energy storage gets better or the ability to recharge in the field. See, here's the thing. I mean, if we were able to recharge our buses in the field, the amount of storage capacity really wouldn't matter all that much. The challenge is that to put in, say I put in 3 charging stations in the community, say one downtown at our intermodal at our bus station, maybe one at a shopping center like the Oakdale Mall, and who knows, maybe even at one of the university locations. Those are $1.5 million to $2.5 million projects that can take 2.5 to 3 years from concept to bidding, awarding, and actually building and testing these capital projects. And so it's a very major undertaking. So we're trying to find that right balance. But the easy answer to your question is, at the current state of technology, I don't think that any of us really have the ability to go fully electric at this point. Part of this is just, it's a matter of getting started, and then, as the technology develops, we're going to be able to get more and more fully electric vehicles and charge them more efficiently.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Valdi. You mentioned the price of a diesel bus was $550,000 up front for a 40-foot bus. And I think you said, I'm sorry?
550,000, just over $500,000.
Yes. And I think you said $750,000 for a hybrid electric bus, the latest generation. Is that true?
Yep.
And how much would these fully battery powered buses be upfront cost?
They are, we'll call them 1.1 to 1.2 million, and that includes an $80,000 charging station per vehicle.
Okay, including $80,000 charging station.
Yep.
And I noticed from the spec sheet that Nova Bus has that the structure of these buses is stainless steel, which is fantastic in terms of reducing corrosion. And the skins of the buses are primarily
They're composite material
of some sort. Yeah. So how long do you anticipate these buses will last? And can you reveal any kind of guarantees in terms of the how long the structure, major components are, under warranty, as well as key things such as the electric motor and the battery system, as well as these charging stations.
So yeah, these are really, really excellent questions. The majority of the capital that purchased public transportation buses comes from the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, and they consider a 40-foot transit bus to be a 12-year asset. So that bus has got to last at least 12 years. Ours do about 50 to 60,000 miles a year on average. We keep our buses longer than 12 years, so they're realistically at least a 14-year asset. And stainless steel chassis is really essential because of the corrosion problem we have. I don't see any but getting away from salt and sand as a way of de-icing in New York State anytime in the near future. And it's really corrosive on our vehicles. And we do a lot of countermeasures to help reduce that. But we expect these vehicles to perform to industry standard, which, they're going to be at least a 14-year vehicle. So in theory, there's fewer components. There's actually quite a few fewer components in a full electric vehicle. The biggest one is what you call the motor. It's known as a traction motor. And those are probably going to be replaced 1 to 3 times over the course of life of that vehicle. The battery packs themselves, depending upon how they're used in a type of climate, those can be replaced 2 or 3 times over that 14-year period. And so one of our challenges is about the recycling of those. And I know that's something you guys talk about as part of your discussions. But one of the things that we found with batteries is that they don't like temperature extremes. So the batteries don't work really well when they're super cold, and they don't work really well when it's super hot. So they've actually been encasing the batteries in separate chambers, and you climate control them. You have air conditioning and heat to keep your batteries at a stable temperature. Of course, that draws battery energy of itself. So the better you take care of your batteries, the better you take care of your vehicles, the more likely they are to go the distance. Where we have challenges is that our vehicles, there's collisions and things like that over 14 years and 700,000 miles of use. They're going to get dinged up and bumped around. And so how those vehicles are built and be able to be serviced and put back into use is an important design consideration. So one of the emerging leaders in the full electric bus vehicles is a company called Proterra. And they're actually building their chassis out of a full composite material. There really isn't a lot of metal in the chassis, kind of like a big Mattel toy in a sense that, they're really strong plastic with an electric motor and a battery. One of the challenges, though, of implementing that type of corrosion-resistant technology is how do you fix them when they get crashed? So it's one of the reasons why we went with Nova Bus, who has an excellent history of building really good, strong, durable, reliable vehicles. And the MTA down in New York has actually considered them up to an 18-year vehicle, which is amazing in this industry.
I
Very
see that
good.
there are a couple of questions on the chat. Should I read the first one?
If you would.
Okay. When cycling or walking, the sound of vehicles has signaled to me to be careful. So I have mixed feelings about the silence of electric vehicles, especially buses. Is this being considered?
It is being considered, and it's a very interesting point. The one thing you'll notice about an electric bus, 40-foot bus, they do make some noise. It's a different type of noise. You certainly can perceive it because it's a higher pitch. I know that when things like the first Prius came out, there was a lot of pedestrian accidents. And one of the things they've learned is to actually make the vehicles noisier. So these buses, some of them are actually being designed and built with loudspeaker systems that they can either create an artificial noise or they can amplify the vehicle noise. And they can, some of them that they're actually testing down in the MTA, they're using GPS technology to know when they're approaching intersections, and it makes a noise that makes people look. How well the public will embrace that, we'll see. But no, it's a very interesting question, and it is something the industry has thought about.
Okay. Next question. This is from Doug. Are there any plans to expand bus service to more remote areas, such as the outskirts of Vestal?
Yeah, so this is in sort of an age-old question about rural. We call it rural transportation. So anything that falls within 3-mile radius outside of your urban core in a community is considered rural. And one of the challenges is the economics of it. You have a lot less vehicle density with traveling what we call spur routes. So if you think of going up and down the river valley as our primary path to travel, anywhere that we travel outside is a spur. And it's in terms of what our industry, another term we use is called cost recovery. So, you know, are we breaking even, or are we losing a lot of money? I mean, where do we stand from an economic perspective? So one of the things that the industry is, and NIPTA in general, as far as legislatively, is looking for more robust funding for what we call rural transportation. I am currently launching an early phase of what we're going to be considering microtransit or transit on demand, where we think we can operate more efficiently and cover the broader expanses of the community by using a lot of technology to help us schedule our buses, so that, say, we're running to the far corners of Vestal, or even, you know, outside, you know, to rural Binghamton, you know, are we carrying as many people efficiently as possible when we're doing that? And so we are moving towards trying to enhance rural transportation. But at the end of the day, it's a very challenging problem, because most people that need public transportation that are in a rural setting, most of the services people need, healthcare, food, nutrition, that type of thing, education, is all located more in the urban core. And so it's really as much a funding problem as much or more than the logistical challenge that it presents. But it is something that we are advocating to get better funded.
I don't see any more questions on the chat at this time.
Okay.
There is one more. It's
Nancy Gale.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have kind of little connections in all these different areas. I just moved back here from Rochester in August. Before that, I lived in Endicott in Crossview Heights in Holiday Hill, and outside of Endicott for 22 years. Then I moved up to Rochester, and I was up there for 15 years. And I worked for a company, a medical motor services, which is a nonprofit transportation company. Actually was just 100 years old. That transported, like, there was, I call them departments. There's foster care, the children from their, home schools or whatever, to their visits, and then back and forth, all that. And then we had people going to doctor's appointments. There was people going to the chemical dependency programs and all kinds of things. And then we had, there were different schools, the public schools, the city schools, the suburban schools. And then there was what was it? Mary Cariola, which is like special needs children, all kinds of things. And I worked for them for 15 years. I fell and hurt my knee about 3 years ago, so I had to retire. But anyways, and so we were all over Monroe County, and we even went outside of Monroe County for sometimes. So Rochester, you were talking earlier about, so I saw some of the new electric buses and stuff like that. And then they have the
Yep.
tandem ones. And then they started what you're calling Microtransit, where they're smaller buses, like, well, we had, I can't remember the name. Can't believe 3 years and it's like I've already forgotten all this stuff. But
Yeah, they went through a
um,
process known as reimagining, and they incorporated microtransit, and they've rolled it out. They're actually going to double their capacity because they've had such a response to it.
yes, but the reason it being that a lot of the well, you know, with the depression and everything, and losing Kodak, et cetera, and Xerox and everything. It's like, you know, poverty heaven here. Anyway, but there is a lot of people, you know, and a lot of people, it's very poor community, actually.
It's one of the poorest
Quite a-
in New York State.
Right. And the educational system, you know, we've been working for years. It's like it's on that too. But you've got the University of Rochester, you've got that whole system, they're taking over the whole city. You know, the Strong Memorial Hospital and everything like that. And then on the north side, up by the lake, you've got a Rochester Regional, that's a system. They've got the Park Ridge Hospital and Rochester General. So there's like two whole systems. And that's like the biggest employer in the whole area, where the hospitals, besides the RIT and St. John
U of R.
Fisher. Yeah, U of R, which is strong. That's what I said. And RIT, St. John Fisher. What's the one out in? Well, there's other one. Oh, Rochester Wesleyan Method, the Wesleyan one out there. In Chile, but the point I was going to make is, I, you know, covered I could drive 200 miles a day, you know, and just, you know, the suburban, the outskirts, so you're calling the rural areas, which we did that too. I mean, we covered the whole county. And you're talking about, you know, think people like reducing the number of vehicles, you know, individual vehicles. It's like people can't actually do that. The ones that live on, because there's no, but I heard over and over again, we can't get the bus. It takes, if you want to live out in the rural, say you want to live out in Greece, or you want to live in Webster or something, and you want to go to the other side of the city, which is like, say 5 miles, you want to go to get a job. You want to have a job and you don't have a car. It may take you three hours to go from one side of the city to the other. And so people, you know, so things like that, I heard that over and over, and because, you know, the clientele that we had were a lot of the, you know, poorer people. And that's just a fact. But anyway, and it's like, when you were talking, Jim, about education of these new mechanics, quote mechanics.
Right.
I'm going to call that one of the, you know, how we had, what do you call it? The master craftsmen. You've got carpenters, electricians, stonemasons, plumbers, carpenter, you know, all that stuff. We don't have apprentice programs anymore. And, you know, people are going, everybody's got to be computer illiterate and all that kind of stuff. It's like, but people are always going to need homes. You're going to need carpenters. You're going to need all those skills, right? Why can't this be a new one of those? And Broome, I'm also an alumni from Broome. So that's what started out as a technical school, right? Well, why can't we, like, when you mentioned that, I thought, hey, yes. And at Kevin Drum, it's like, yes. I mean, you know, and it's expanding too, and it's been expanding. They they turned the library into the Cultural Arts and Events Center, right? That's part of Broome.
The culinary, yeah.
Culinary arts.
The culinary, yeah, that one. That's a community thing too. I mean, it's community oriented.
So that's another area, the support for skilled trades. And I know that Dr. Drum, a lot of people in education are really starting to get it about the skilled trades.
Right.
And as somebody, I've been employing people in skilled trades for most of my career, and it's always been a challenge and getting more challenging. One of the things though is, it tends to be younger people that invest in their education, and they're less likely to reinvest over time. So, getting a conventional diesel mechanic with, 25 years on the job, it's very difficult to get them to retrain in a different technology. So oftentimes you have to, get young people and get them in apprentice type programs to get them in collaborative environments. And I mean, it's the whole issue about skilled trades. I can't disagree with, your point, because, you look at Germany's been one of the most successful economies for decades, and in part because they've always embraced apprenticeship programs, and they've always embraced skilled trades.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it makes a lot of sense economically that not everybody is in a technology or, that type of vocation.
Yeah. And one of the other
it's
things
good.
would be that the transportation, like from students, in Pennsylvania, in the outer areas, the distance wise to get to SUNY to class, it's like they built the dorms there now. I mean, that's what they're doing around the state. The community colleges now building dorms, so people they don't have to have apartments, and they don't have to travel. They can be right on campus, like, bigger universities. So that's one of the things they did. But the transportation would be also helpful. Another component of that, you're making it more, Broome more accessible to a broader area of students that maybe, they don't have the money to buy a car and all that kind of stuff. That's another thing to look at. But anyway, I will shut up now unless you have any questions.
Well, thanks for your comments.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I got a few other questions too. I happen to be an avid follower of electric vehicles, so other people that maybe aren't so in tune with that, please bear with me, because these questions actually do matter. One thing I'm wondering about is these particular buses that made by Nova Bus, do they condition their battery pack with air or with liquid cooling? Do you know?
It will be air conditioned from what I understand, and that's what our hybrids are right now. They use actually the heating system is actually built by BAE themselves. They do use a third party to make, but they will be air cooled, which will, it's a little bit less efficient than liquid cooling, but it adds an awful lot less complexity in doing that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The other thing I'm wondering too is, are they going to be using heat pumps, air source heat pumps by chance, to help do this conditioning of the battery pack that's especially important on a cold day before the bus starts running, if they're parked outside, especially if you don't have enough space in a heated garage, and also for cabin heating and defrosting of the windshield and accessories, that type of thing.
And it's an interesting point about heat pumps, because they've become much more efficient with digital motors. And it used to be they weren't very viable in a northeastern climate, but they are more so now. Just about everybody in public transportation has the ability to keep their vehicles under cover, which is one of the reasons why facilities matter so much. Just think about the snow we just got in the last few days and the cold extremes. Just try to imagine getting all those buses cleaned off and running. So, it's less of a challenge. The problem with current heating is that on a day like we had a few days ago, where we're in single digits and negative, you're consuming more energy to heat the vehicle than you are to actually operate it and move it. So right now, and this is a little bit of a secret of the industry, but it's a statement of reality, is that most of the buses being sold as full electric vehicles have very small diesel fueled heating systems on them so that you're not draining as much out of your battery. And, you know,
Is that-
there's 10.
Is that true for these
Go ahead.
Nova buses too?
We're going to have a supplemental heater system in them, though. We will evaluate that with our next buses, because I know that I just talked to the CEO up in Albany, Carm Basile. He's a very progressive guy, and they have already tested added battery capacity where they're able to meet their heating requirements and run a full service day on pure battery. But most of the transit properties, and I believe Ithaca as well, they've got small supplemental heaters. We call them Robastos. That's the company that makes them. But you know, they're very, very low emission because they're just tiny little furnaces is what they are. But you know, that's right now, to get the battery range in to keep people comfortable. That's the state of the industry right now.
Okay, well, that I predict that they will move to air source heat pumps soon. Tesla has those in their latest vehicles, and that helps extend the range of these vehicles in cold weather. So that's coming. I predict it's going to be coming, and I hope they incorporate it soon. The other thing I'm wondering is,
and typically the automotive industry is quite a few years ahead of the transit industry. So you're right, that trickle down technology will likely get there, but
Good.
It's usually a good 5 to 10 years behind the automotive industry.
okay. The other thing too I'm wondering about is, you mentioned the repairability of these things, and I'm also thinking about damage tolerance, especially the battery pack. I know these things are low floor buses, so is the battery pack up in the roof in these buses?
Well, it's a combination, and so just a little bit about the battery packs. For those that don't know, most manufacturers are using conventional batteries. There's nothing unique about the batteries. In fact, some of my hybrid buses are using the same type of batteries you might find in a laptop. So even Teslas, if you look at the batteries in a Tesla, they look like a regular dry cell battery, just a little bit bigger. But right now, the batteries are on the roof, and some are located in the space gained in the engine compartment. You've actually since you don't have a large engine, you just have a traction motor. There's room in that compartment. I work with several of the manufacturers to help them do product development, and one of the things I've talked about is purpose building these buses, and Proterra is doing it too, where they're actually doing more like the automotive industry, where they're putting the battery packs in the floors and they're protecting them with really structural surrounds on them. You basically would slide the batteries in and out on a tray. But the likelihood of those batteries being damaged in an accident in any of these designs is very, very low. Okay,
Good. And the other thing too is, if you're going over a hump, like railroad tracks, if it gets, the bottom hits, then you could end up with problems there too. So they have to be wary of that, and your route design has to take those things into consideration as well.
Yeah, there's a height restriction in New York State for any vehicle, so we measure them, and they've got to be a good 6 to 8 inches below any of the standards, because anytime people start paving underpasses, they don't always remeasure and put up a new sign. So there has to be a little wiggle room there, but they're well aware of the industry standards.
Okay, very good. The other thing too, the range of these buses, I looked at the spec sheet, and it lists a kilowatt hours that it can have up to 564 kilowatt hours of onboard energy, which is basically 5.5 times the largest Tesla vehicle currently in production. But it doesn't state what the range is. And do you have an approximate figure of how much range this might be able to provide, and how much of a full day, or can it meet a full day of service for your most demanding routes?
Yeah, that's I think, a little harder to pin down the manufacturers to give specifics because so much of their range is dependent upon how the vehicles are driven. And one of the reasons why the transit industry is favorable for electrification is that we run a lot of stop and go work. So most of our urban core, the vehicles are accelerating, they're stopping for a stop, and they use the kinetic or the motion energy of the vehicle and they turn it into electrical energy. So a lot of what's going on in the transit industry is regaining energy from braking. And it really depends on the kind of routes you have. So if it was BC Transit running vehicles up and down Glenwood Avenue, up and down a hill all day in the middle of winter, we're not going to have a range that is something the manufacturers are going to want to brag about. But if they're running up and down the center of the urban core on a nice spring day, our calculations put us at about a 12-hour service day. So that is much better than the 6, 8, and 10 hours that people were seeing prior to this. But
So-
your mileage will vary how you use them.
So on a nice optimal spring day, you could meet an entire day's run for one of these buses, at least on a gentle, flat, relatively flat route. Is that true?
Yeah, so we run what we call Route 35. That runs up and down Main Street, and it's got multitudes of stops. I'm anticipating on a route like that where we're getting a lot of regenerative braking that we might be approaching a 14-hour full service day. So, but again, until we get out there and test it and look at the data, we won't know for sure.
Good. So my other question that goes right along with range, it got to do with battery chemistry and the electronics to charge it is how long to recharge? The manufacturer states 3.25 hours for, I guess, full charge, I guess they're talking about. Is that true?
Well, yeah, and so with batteries, you can push a lot of charge into them very, very quickly. What that does, though, is it tends to degrade the chemical composition more rapidly, and part of it's just a function of heat. They get really hot when you do that. So the slower you can charge them, in a sense, actually, the better it is for the battery to get its full, they call a memory or a shadow, to get that full charge back into the battery. So as long as we can recharge them overnight, it's really the best way to slow charge them. So it really depends on how much amperage or how much pressure from your recharging infrastructure you want to put into your vehicles. And so we want what's just going to be enough to get the job done over the course of the evening.
Okay, good. And so the other thing you mentioned is you said it's pretty expensive to have these remote charging. Were you talking about overhead charging that maybe in 6 minutes they could give, I forgot what the spec sheet said, but something on the order of, what's it say? 6 minutes overhead, 35 kilowatt hour boost. Is that what you were mentioning? These expensive remote chargers that you might put in?
If you were to put the expensive ones out, there's really two basic types. One is what's called a pantograph, or it's like an overhead thing. It literally makes contact with the top of the vehicle when you pull in, and it very rapidly pushes a lot of amperage into the batteries to get a recharge. And you're not getting a full recharge. You're getting enough recharge to get it around for, several more hours. The other one is inductive charging, which a lot of people, some are even getting them in their cars now, but basically you set it on an inductive pad and it will recharge your battery without physically plugging it in. So those are the two options out there. And one of the challenges we face as decision makers in the industry is, what is the industry standard going to be? Is the $2 million project I'm putting in today, is that going to be good in 10 years? And so that's one of the things that is not really standardized in the industry yet. It's getting there, but it's hard to make those commitments. So I think the majority of the properties are moving towards the slower, cheaper charging stations.
Okay. I guess the last couple of questions, they're kind of related. do you see much coordination from New York State or even support from your own county legislature and the county executive in terms of funding, low interest loans, incentives, grants to help speed up this transition and encourage it to happen as quickly as possible, and also to educate the public about it? I know that this meeting here is a good piece of that education, but some advertising by the county, social media is relatively cheap. Maybe a newspaper article, a story on WSKG public radio. There's ways to get the story out to people that this is a good news thing. It's good news for the local economy here because of the jobs that are helped to be created by this new technology with these battery powered buses. The Nova bus in Plattsburgh, they're manufacturing the bus bodies. And as well as the improvement in rider experience, as well as doing our part to help save a habitable climate. This is a great story all around.
Well, sounds like I need to sign you up to do the voiceover when we produce a. You've got the part. You've passed the audition.
Well, I'm glad of that. That's a positive thing that I heard today. That's like, thank you very much. I don't want a second career, but I'm certainly willing to help spread the word any way I can. So keep me in mind if you do want such a thing.
We will, and we will be doing some promotion once we get these vehicles close to implementation. So, but I found that the political climate, both locally, our legislature, county executive, the local business community, it's all very supportive. They're very supportive at Albany and even at the federal level. It's one of those rare situations, and don't tell anybody, but politicians, Republicans and Democrats tend to agree on public transportation and making ourselves more energy efficient and lower emissions. So they don't argue much about it.
Really? Wow, that's a second piece of good news here. That is surprising.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. We all need that positive.
Thank you.
No, we really do get excellent support. And I think having just gone through a pandemic and showing how vital public transportation was in keeping essential services flowing, keeping goods and, aides going to nursing homes and all that, there's a lot of understanding of the value of public transportation now than I've seen in my whole career.
Good. Yeah, that's good news too, even from a tragic event of the pandemic, but that is positive. And you're right that there's a lot of young people especially that are struggling, and not everybody can afford a vehicle. And as was mentioned by Nancy Gale, access to public transportation is really vital to so many people, and it's overlooked in many cases. People don't think about it, and planning, yes, does need to be looked at and better regulated so that we don't have just unregulated sprawl that just makes it hard for public transportation to keep up, and for our roads and bridges, our infrastructure to keep up with as well. Those are tough topics, and they lead to controversy, but they must be dealt with. So this all fits together in a big picture, and public transit is very important. And thank you for the work you're doing, and for all your knowledge, and for your volunteer involvement as well. Do anybody else have any questions? I know that there's one person from the county that was on. She might have dropped off by now, but I don't see her now. Anybody else with questions, comments?
Well, I'll just say that I heard a news report today, that in Europe, this last year, the sales of electric vehicles surpassed the sales of diesel vehicles for the first time.
Yes, it's coming. It's
coming.
exponential and it's coming. And the traditional automakers are being caught flat-footed for the most part. They are playing catch up, and this is something that we.
In my
Go ahead.
opinion, they're all committed. They've turned the corner.
I hope so.
And actually, one of the reasons why I like working with Nova is they're owned by Volvo, and Volvo stepped in very early to make a very strong statement about moving to pure EVs all across their platforms.
Good. Yeah, they've got a good car product out there too. Their Polestar brand seems to be pretty good.
And they're commercial trucks too. And people don't realize how big they are in commercial trucking, and they're very, very innovative, forward-thinking company.
Good.
Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate you guys having me today. Hopefully it helped illustrate some of the challenges and what's going on with the industry.
Can I put in another plug for, I'm like an educator person too. I was trained I went to Albany when it was a state teachers college, many decades ago. Anyway, so a plug for the education. That's why I actually went back. So I got a 4-year degree there decades ago. Then I went back to Broome in 90, got a 2-year degree in 96. So, and now I'm a supporter of them, fund wise. So, and I remember I moved to Baltimore for a few months, and I went to that, Motor Trend, the car talk guys that are on the radio that years ago.
Looking classic Capit Brothers.
Yes. So they had in their shop down there. It's in one of the little suburbs down there. They had a class. The guy taught the class, and in their garage, right in where they work. And I was sitting next to it. Like there was about 25 people, and I was sitting next to this pilot, airplane pilot, and there was only a few of us women. But the comment that I remember was because it's like, how guys, when we were younger, or when I was, you could go down to the corner garage, learn about cars, how to repair them, and blah blah blah. And the comment that he made that said they have to basically have a college degree, or because they have to read flow charts and all these things, and all the computers around vehicles. And so that was like, and I'm still sure that there's all these people that don't want to work in McDonald's and all that kind of stuff, which, we need those people too. But if you look at it's a new, quote, new skilled trade, being a mechanic for, automobiles, buses, trucks, airplanes, boats, et cetera, everything. That could be, like that kind of thing that might, there's motorcycles and all these new vehicles that people have and guys have. And it kind of promote it, from that point perspective, like in their minds, it's like, it's one of those, really go-to jobs. It's like, yeah. I'm sure there's lots of guys, boys, whatever, that are still like mechanically, inclined or interested. My grandson just graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. He got his master's in aeronautical engineering, stuff, et cetera.
Nancy Gale, I need to cut in. It's almost
Okay.
9, and
Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay.
We're keeping
Anyway.
Greg. He's been a busy guy. We don't want to keep him any
Okay, no.
longer tonight.
That's fine, but just keep that in mind. That
Yeah.
perspective.
Yep.
All right.
Will do.
Can I throw in one last quick question? This
Sure.
living laboratory agreement, did that expand to include sharing data with Novabus as well?
That's right. It will.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody that joined us tonight for your good questions and comments. And thank you, most importantly, Greg, for all the work you're doing and for helping us understand what's going on at Broome County Transit in New York State as well.
It's very helpful,
All right,
Greg.
you're very
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Good night.